Welcome to my channel. In this video, I'll explain some of the powerful looping constructs in Excel VBA. For next, do while and do until. I'll explain how to calculate the factorial of a number using these three different looping constructs. So to create the function, I'll go to the developer tab, select Visual Basic. There I'll create a module. I'm going to create the three different functions using for next, do while and do until. So I'll call the first function as factorial1. So I'll start with the name of the function. Name of the function is factorial1. I need to pass an argument to this function to calculate the factorial of a number. So the number should be sent to the function as an argument. So I'll call this as n, and it's a data type. I'll declare as integer. Because positive integer numbers only you can calculate the factorial. So I'll declare the data type as integer. I'll close the bracket. Now, after calculating the factorial, it should return the factorial. So that should have a data type. I'll declare it as a variant because it can contain different data types, so including string. And I am planning to send a message when we are trying to calculate the factorial of negative numbers. So in this case, variant can hold numbers as well as string. So now if you press enter, it will create the structure of the function. I'm going to use a loop, and looping index, I'll give it as I. No, it's a data type you should define. So I'll define I as integer. So loop counter I'll declare as an integer. Is a loop counter. I declare it as an integer. Then initially I'll assign the factorial as 1. It's factorial 1. That is the name of the function. I'll copy this and paste it here. That will assign a value 1. And if it's a negative number, I'll change instead of factorial is equal to 1, I'll make this a message factorial does not exist. If it's 0 or 1, factorial will be 1 only. But if it's negative, I should get a message factorial does not exist. So initially I'll assign factorial 1 as 1. Now I'll check the sign of this number. If it's negative, I should pass a message that factorial does not exist. So I can use an if function. If n less than 0, then we can assign factorial 1 is equal to, I'll type the message here, factorial does not exist. So I'll put it as do not exist. I'll DNA I'll put, so that will pass on the message factorial does not exist. I have to end this if statement. I'll use end if. By mistake, if you give negative numbers, you should get the message like this. So factorial will be 1 will be assigned this string. This message as a string will be assigned. Now, if it's not negative also it will come to this loop. But for negative numbers, the loop should not execute. So I'm using the for next loop. So for I is equal to 1 to n. For I is equal to 1 to n. Starting from 1 to n. If it's 0, it will not enter the loop. For 1, it will execute. So it is from 1 to n. Starting with the I is equal to 1, it will execute up to n. But when n is negative, the final value is less than the starting number. So the loop will not run at all. So for negative numbers, after getting this message, it will not enter this loop. So for I is equal to 1 to n, when n is 1, it will run once. If it is 2 times it will execute. So negative numbers, it will not enter the loop. So here the loop is going to execute n times. Okay. So now each time, and the factorial, already factorial is assigned 1, the factorial should be multiplied with the I value. So I'll write it as factorial 1 is equal to factorial 1 multiplied by I. So it is multiplied with I, that is loop counter 1. Initially it is multiplied by 1. So 1 into 1, it will become 1 only. So when I is 2, that is if n is 2 or greater, so n is a higher value, it will again increment. When I is 2, it will multiply with 2. 1 into 2 will get 2. And when I become 3, so 2 into 3, 6. Like each time it will multiply with the loop counter. So if n is 5, you are going to get 1 into 2 into 3 into 4 into 5. So that is factorial of 5. So this within the loop will calculate the factorial of the number. So now after calculating this, we should end the loop. And you should write next I. So after once the loop executes, it is asking for to do it for the next value of I. So next value of I will be, initially it's 1, next value of I is, after incrementing it will become 2 until it reaches n. This multiplication will continue. So once it exits from the loop, factorial 1 will have that factorial of the number which you entered as the argument. Now let us check this function. Function name is factorial 1. I'll close this VBA editor and go to the here in the Excel sheet where I have created a table for numbers from 0 to 15, and also to test a negative number I have written a number. So this is using for next loop. So here factorial 1, this is our function. I'll select this value. I can type any number here, but instead I'll select the cell address, close the bracket and press enter. So you're getting 1. I'll send down this formula so that it will calculate for all the numbers. So I'll click this fill handle here on the right bottom corner. So that will create factorial of all these numbers. So finally, for negative number, I am getting this customized message. Factorial does not exist. Now I'll modify this function to change the loop using do while construct. So again, I'll go to the Visual Basic editor. Only I have to modify this function. So I'll copy this function, Control C, and then I'll paste it down. So this is another function, but I need to change the function name. So I'll put it as factorial 2. So wherever factorial 1 is there, I'll change to factorial 2. So I change the function name as factorial 2. Now this part will remain same. Factorial 2 is initially assigned the value 1. And these are negative numbers also, you should get the message. But here, instead of for next loop, I'm going to create a do while. But do while in incrementing will not be done automatically. You have to create a counter. So for that I value, you should initially define as 1. I'll define I as 1. Now here, this I have to give do while. Do while. Now I need to check the value of I. I less than or equal to n. As long as I is less than or equal to n, and this calculation should be done. This is similar to for next loop only. I'm doing the calculation for as long as I is less than or equal to n. When I is 1, initially 1, and if n is say 5, I is less than 5. So this multiplication will do. Initially it is 1, 1 into 1 you will get 1. Then you have to increment it. It will not automatically increment. So I'll use a counter here. I is equal to I plus 1. So I'll use this and then I'll instruct this to loop. So this is a do while loop. Do while I less than or equal to n. Initially this counter you should create separately. I is equal to 1, I is equal to I plus 1. This incrementing should happen within the loop. So as long as I is less than or equal to n, you are multiplying each time with the index value, then incrementing the I value, then looping this. So when it's equal to n also has to be carried out, and finally when it exits the loop, you will have factorial 2 as the factorial of the number which you have given as argument. So this will calculate the factorial of the number, and here we have used do while structure. So I'll close this and check this. Here I have do while structure for the same numbers I have typed here. So here I'll check this function equal to factorial 2. This cell I'll select, close the bracket, press enter. Now I'll send down this formula. So I'm getting the same values. Okay, finally the negative numbers, same message you are getting. Now we need to do it again for the do until structure. So let us see what changes we need to make from do while to do until. So I'll go to Visual Basic Editor. I'll copy this function and paste it down. So now this function I'll call it as factorial 3. Factorial 3. So here also I'll change factorial 3. Here this part will remain same. Here counter also you should create I is equal to 1. Do until. So we are only making this change until. But when you use until, I less than or equal to n we cannot use. So if you use until, when I is equal to n, this loop will not be executed. When I is equal to n, this loop will not be executed. So we want this loop to be executed when it is equal also. So what we have to do is, instead of less than or equal to, you can give greater than. So instead of less than or equal to, you should give greater than. So when I greater than n only, that is, if n is 5, when I becomes 6, this loop will not be executed. When I is 5, this n is also 5, I is not greater than 5, so the loop will be executed. When I becomes 6, then the loop will not be executed. So this change, when you use until, instead of less than or equal to, you should use a greater than symbol, so that when I is equal to n, the loop will be executed, and I greater than n, the loop will not be executed. This is an example function using do until construct. Now I'll close this and let us check the function equal to factorial. This function name is factorial 3. So I have 3 different functions. Now I should call factorial 3. I'll select the cell address, close the bracket, and then press enter. Now I'll apply the formula to the downward cells. Same result you are getting. So all these 3 different loop constructs, I will calculate to the factorial of the numbers. So any numbers you can calculate the factorial. There is a built-in function to calculate the factorial, that is the fact. But negative numbers, if you try to calculate, it will create an error. So, but here in our case, we are getting a customized message as factorial does not exist. So this is only a demonstration for explaining various loop constructs in Excel VBA. That's all in this tutorial. Thank you for watching.